Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /EntitledPeople, where people truly believe the world revolves around them and they're the main character. And in today's episode, we've got entitled officers, Karen parents, people calling 911 for ridiculous reasons, and one OP tells a story about the time a Karen tries to get him jailed for impersonating a doctor. I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So I work at a small liquor store in Georgia. One day, this older 50-ish-year-old man comes in with a young girl that might be 18 at oldest. The guy brings 2 bottles of whiskey up to the counter and the girl brings a 6-pack of beer. Obviously, since Georgia law requires anyone who brings alcohol up to the counter with the intent of buying it, I have to check her ID, so I ask for the ID. The guy then says, no, she's not buying it, I'm buying it. That's when I say, well, she brought it to the register, so by law, I have to see her ID and confirm she's 21. He then says, this is my daughter and the beer is for my wife. The guy then pulls out a police badge and he places it on the counter. He then proceeds to tap his finger on it as if to tell me who he is and to let it slide. I just pause in disbelief and I think to myself, is this guy really trying to do this? So we then go back and forth how the beer can't be purchased. And the guy even tries the old, what if she goes and waits in the car and I buy it? Or what if she puts back the beer and I bring it to the register? That's when I tell him, sir, you being an officer of the law should know what the laws are. The fact that you're putting me in this position is inconsiderate, and I cannot in any way sell you this 6-pack. The guy then gives me the dirtiest look, and he tells me that he knows the owner of the store, whatever that's supposed to mean. I tell him I also know the owner of the store. What's the point? It's at this point he then concedes and leaves the store. I wish I could say some more crazy stuff happened, but no. I then told the owner what happened, thinking we can have a good laugh about it. She knew who I was talking about because she saw him moments before this happened. Also, he lives down the street from her. The guy was an officer of a neighboring city. I'm not gonna get into any specifics other than that. But I mean, maybe he was getting it for his wife like he said, but I still can't sell it to him. For all I know, it could have been a sting because that's a thing. They will do that to liquor stores. Exactly, right? And it's a good thing OP did stand their ground because who knows, maybe the cop was testing them to see how they'd react, or maybe not, right? Maybe the guy was a little bit self-entitled and he thinks his badge means he can bend the law in his favor. With that said though, I think we can agree that slipping the badge in front of a retail worker and tapping on it to show who OP was dealing with was quite cringy. And this person comments, as a dude who works in a liquor store, I'm so done with it. If someone in the group doesn't have ID, I just refuse the sale. It's not worth the fines or jail. Fortunately, we have a sign that we're required by our ABC to display that says we can refuse anyone for any reason. And this person says, not with alcohol, but often, local law enforcement would set up tobacco stings at various locales where I am. They would send in a kid who's 17 and doesn't have ID, but who will try and wheedle. If you sell them the smokes, you're busted, and it's a $600 fine to whoever made the sale. And the business itself can be fined up to $10,000, and you're pretty much guaranteed to get fired on top of that. And one last comment, this person says, you should definitely contact his superior. If it was a sting, then so be it, but if not, that's totally unacceptable behavior and should be reported. So I worked as a 911 operator for 7 years, during which time I was promoted to shift lead, which essentially means I was the assistant manager for that shift. During the shift manager's 2 days off, I was the highest ranking member of our department because we worked swing shift and admin was gone for the day. We were super busy one night and the phones were ringing constantly. I answered a 911 call and I spoke to the caller long enough to determine that nobody was dying, bleeding, or on fire. before I put him on hold to answer another line. The second call turns out to be a drunk man with a gun at a family gathering, which took me about 15 minutes to handle until the police and EMT showed up. In the meantime, there was no one available to pick up my hold. I finally get back on the other line 15 minutes later, and the caller is absolutely pissed that I would put him on hold after he called 911. The guy was screaming at me that it could have been life or death. I tried to explain that we had to prioritize calls by level of emergency, but he wasn't having any of it, and this will drop your jaws. I come to find out that the guy called 911 looking for cops to come immediately because a man in a truck was going door to door in his neighborhood selling cookies for a bake sale and dared to ring his doorbell. When the man refused to leave the neighborhood and simply went to the next house over, that's when the man called me. And I'll admit, I lost my patience. I told him very bluntly that this in no way resembled an emergency, and that we would not be sending police because the man in question wasn't violating any law. This pissed off my caller even more, and that's when he demands my name and badge number, which I dutifully gave him as we're required to, and then he hung up on me. Well, not even 5 minutes later, one of my probies, whom I'd actually trained, stands up from his console and says, "Hey Jess, I have a caller on the line who wants to complain about a dispatcher." When I asked which dispatcher, my probie hesitates and then says, he wants to complain about you. So I pick up his line, and sure enough, it's my crazy caller. I greet him by saying, "Hi, this is Officer Jess. I'm the dispatch manager. How can I help you?" As soon as he heard my voice, I had to keep from laughing when he starts cursing at me and then hangs up. I found out later that he emailed the chief about my unprofessional behavior. The chief listened to the full call recording and then emailed him back to very politely call him an idiot. Oh boy, gotta love how even the chief was sick of this guy's BS. Like the audacity, right? Some people are just in their own worlds where it's just me. And I just can't comprehend how someone can call 911 and doesn't understand that their crap isn't an emergency. And seriously, that guy was lucky that OP didn't send the police to his house to scold him for abuse of the 911 line. And this person says, my cousin was a 911 dispatcher. She had a few calls from women who wanted to date a certain handsome fireman who had been called to their home recently, but didn't know which station he was from and was hoping the dispatcher could tell them. Yeah, 911 making emergency love connections for over 40 years. And guys, OP does pop into the comments to share more ridiculous calls. They say, our agency actually arrested one dude for the misuse of 911 after he called over 200 times in a 48-hour period to call us dispatchers racist slurs, pigs, fascists, communists, traitors, etc. because he had been told he wasn't allowed to discharge a firearm at his neighbor's house in city limits. And then there was one guy who was banned from calling the police department unless he had a legitimate emergency, because the guy would call, record the call, and try to argue federal law with the dispatchers, who were literally not allowed to answer any questions about any law. He would then post the calls on YouTube. We were told to determine if he had an emergency, and then hang up on him if he didn't. And then there was a lady who was pissed off because I wouldn't send a police officer to bring her dog in from her fenced backyard because it was too dark for her to see, and she'd already taken off her glasses for the night. Some frickin' people, I tell you. And guys, if you think that was ridiculous, listen to this next one. So back a few years ago, I started my own photography business. I loved photographing things, and I thought, why not? Anyways, I had a few gigs here and there. Some weddings, some sports events, etc. It was fun meeting new people. One time, I got a gig for a club newspaper. It was nothing big, but it did pay my camera bill I had. I was next to the tennis court when an elderly couple comes up to me. They looked around 70-ish and pretty fragile. The man had a walking stick, and the woman had one of those larger walking helpers. So I just smiled at them, said hello, and went on photographing. It was a women's match, and the women were all 20 to 30 years old. The under 30 team, I guess. I knew quite a few personally, due to them being in the tennis club I play tennis at. One of them was 15 though. She was an amazing tennis player, seriously, and she was the sister of one of my friends. Anyways, it was her turn, so obviously I was photographing her. So here I was, photographing as normal until I heard a cough. I didn't think anything of it, and that's when it continued. Another cough, and then another. So I looked up, looked around, and I saw this old couple staring at me. Obviously confused, I asked, "How may I help you, sir?" The man looked at me sternly. At least, that's what I think he was trying to go for. He then says, "You shouldn't be photographing young women like that. I think you should leave." Hearing him say that, I was even more confused, and then turn around, making sure that he was actually talking to me, and he was. There was no one else around. So I answer politely, yet very nervous due to my anxiety building up. I say to him, "Sir, I'm photographing for the club magazine. I didn't get any further as the man starts grabbing at my camera. He then says I should call the cops on you for stalking this young girl. Of course, I was in complete and utter shock. I shakily reply, "Sir, I promise you, I'm actually supposed to be here." The woman then finally spoke up, and oh boy, I kind of regretted not leaving. She then says, "I'm calling the police right now. Don't you dare leave." At this point, I looked stunned since 1, she was gonna call the police, and that makes me very, very nervous. 2, I'm starting to get a panic attack. And 3, this woman was yelling, so everyone was looking to see what the commotion was about. This is when the team captain, a friend of mine, comes over and asked, "Is there a problem here?" Before I could respond, the man starts shouting, "This man here is taking pictures of that young player there. We're calling the police." As he finished that sentence, he picks up the phone from his wife's hands and he starts chatting with police. The team captain then looks at me and she noticed I was going deathly pale and my breathing almost stopped. And let me tell you, it's not a good experience. She then yelled to her teammates, who were on the other side of the court, to grab a bottle of water and rush it over to hand it to me. The team captain then tried explaining that I'm a hired photographer who works with them for the club magazine. The old couple didn't believe her though, thinking that she was also in on my business of photographing young girls. After about nearly forever, the police came and they start asking questions. The team captain answered a lot of those questions, repeatedly telling them that I'm working here and I'm not some creep. After probably 30 minutes of arguing with police and wanting them to throw me in jail, the couple actually leave and it was all over. That was a trip down memory lane and not the best experience in all honesty. A big thanks to the team captain for saving me that day. A few years ago, I worked as a sales manager for 3 stores. I had approximately 50 sales team members over the 3 stores, and I did everything from interviewing, hiring, inducting, training, rostering, etc. One time, we were hiring juniors for after-school shifts. The owner arranges some interviews, and I scheduled those that were walk-ins. Interviews were scheduled in 15-minute intervals, but we had both scheduled a 4 p.m. interview, which was no biggie. At some time between 3:55 and 4 p.m., the supervisor interrupts me just before an interview ends. She's got this weird look on her face, and she says to me, there's a lady here and she wants to talk to you, like right now, because her daughter has an interview at 4. I finish the interview and I go to the front to find Karen, with one hand on her hip and the other holding her phone adjacent to her ear. The woman's glaring at me. I say, "Hi, how can I help you?" She then says to me, "Hi, my daughter has an interview at 4 p.m. scheduled by the franchisee. We've been here since 3:30 and now we find out there's another girl here? What's going on?" I explain that yes, the owner and I had overlapped at 4 p.m. I was aware, but it wasn't a big deal. And that's when her tone changes immediately, and she says, "Oh, well, should I send my daughter over?" I then say, "Whoever was here first can interview first." She then raises her voice and says, "Well, we've been here since 3:30. I think my daughter should go in first, don't you?" I just respond, "Well then, send her in." When she came for the interview, I made sure I circled her name. Everyone else who attended got a tick, and those who didn't show up got an X. The girl had her name circled so I wouldn't forget. She interviewed really well, but truth be told, she already failed. I couldn't risk having her mom hovering throughout her employment. In the end, I told her, "If you're a successful applicant, I will contact you Monday evening. I won't be contacting unsuccessful applicants because there's way too many candidates." I then told the owner about the situation, and at 9:15 on Monday, he forwards me an email stating simply, "Hey, is this the girl with the mom?" The original email's from the girl's account, and it said, "Dear Mr. So-and-so, due to management error, I was not on the list of interviews. I did eventually receive an interview, and I was assured that I would be informed this afternoon whether I had the position or not. It's now 7:58 p.m. and I haven't heard from your company. Is this because I didn't get the job, or because once again I've been neglected?" I told the owner she wasn't forgotten or neglected, so we drafted a reply on his behalf saying, "Dear so-and-so, I can assure you that you were on the list of interviewees as I finalized the list. The manager informed you that she would be contacting successful candidates only. Unfortunately, you and your mother were unsuccessful during this recruitment process. Best wishes on future endeavors." The boss and I agreed it sounded like the mom wrote the email and that I had dodged a bullet. Yeah, being a Karen to your kid's potential employer and raising your voice and going down that path is a surefire way to not get them the job. And I agree with OP and their boss when they said it sounded like mom wrote that email. And I just love how they replied, "You and your mother were unsuccessful." You know that Karen was fuming when she read that. But yeah, nothing worse than a helicopter parent being the biggest obstacle in a kid's life. And this next mother, oh my goodness guys, listen to this. So this happened last week, but I still think about it a lot, and I feel both secondhand rage and pity. This new guy joined my team at the start of last month, who we'll call Sam. Sam's a quiet guy, early 30s, polite to a fault, always looking over his shoulder like he's about to get in trouble. At first, I thought he was shy, but within a week, I figured something was off. He would get these phone calls every 30 minutes, like clockwork. Eventually, I asked him if everything was okay. That's when he admitted it was his mom. She needed to know what he was doing at all times, like literally. She'd want to know where you're sitting, what are you eating, who you're talking to, those type of updates. He said he was raised that way and just never broke the habit. I could see him shrink into himself every time she called, like the life just got sucked out of him in real time. Anyways, it's month end and we had to stay back late to wrap up some department reporting. Everyone stayed a couple of extra hours. It was quiet, we're all working, and then suddenly, Sam's phone rings again. He steps outside, and 2 minutes later, he comes back inside, looking white as a sheet. And he says, "Hey, Mr. Boss, my mom wants to speak with you." Now, I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He looked like he was about to cry. I took the call out of sheer disbelief, and oh boy, I wish I hadn't. This woman unleashes on me. She starts screaming at me saying, "How dare you make my son work past office hours? He needs to come home and rest. You don't know what he's been through." Now, I was too stunned to even respond properly. So I just said, "Ma'am, I think Sam can explain the situation better," and then hand the phone back, and that's when something amazing happened. Sam finally snaps. He didn't yell, but his voice was steady, and he said, "I need this job, Mom. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep calling and yelling at my boss." I'm staying late because that's my responsibility, and everyone here is staying late too, so please stop. It was quiet for a second, and then he just ends the call. And honestly, I was so proud of him. I know how hard it is to stand up to your parents, especially when they try to control your whole life. We wrapped up an hour later, and I offered to take him out for a cold drink, just to decompress. And he looked like someone who had finally removed a 20-year-old weight off his chest. When I dropped him off near his house, he gave me a small, awkward smile, and he said, "Thanks, I think tonight's gonna be rough." I haven't heard his mom's voice since then, but he still gets those calls, just less frequently now. I really hope he makes it out okay. Some cages don't even have bars, you just carry them in your head. That is some words of wisdom for every young adult trying to make their way in the world. And I can only hope that OP's that kind of boss that helps Sam realize that he needs to live his own life. Again, nothing worse than an overprotective parent, and it just baffles me how mom was still doing this when her son's in his 30s. If I were OP, I would be issuing a cell phone ban at work. At least that will give Sam a few hours break from his mom every day. So here's some background before I begin. I'm a doctor, and this event happened a few years ago, back when I was a junior doctor. So shiny that you could use me for a shaving mirror. I also had a career before I did medicine, so I was 30 years old when this happened. I had been a doctor for about 8 months at this point. I was on a flight with a well-known airline that has this weird obsession with putting pictures of kangaroos everywhere. I was with my then fiance and some of our friends, going for a trip. The plane had just taken off, maybe 15 minutes in the air, when the flight crew say over the intercom the words that every doctor dreads to hear on a plane. They say, "Is there a doctor on board?" After looking around and seeing that no one else was getting up, I reluctantly head forward to the crew area to introduce myself. Looking very grateful for my presence, a flight attendant shows me to where the passenger in question is sitting. I walk up to a man who looks half dead. Thankfully, the guy's got a medical alert bracelet, and he's still conscious enough to tell me exactly what's going on. The man has Addison's disease, an autoimmune disease affecting the adrenal glands, and the guy feels like he's having an adrenal crisis. Basically, the guy's in shock. Due to lack of hormones the adrenal gland secretes. This is normally managed initially by a hydrocortisone injection, followed by several days of care in the nearest hospital. Unfortunately, he didn't have the right documentation to be able to bring his auto-injector on the plane, so it's in his checked luggage. I thought to myself, crap. So I tell the flight attendant to inform the pilot that we need to get this man to a hospital as soon as humanly possible. Another flight attendant was in the process of talking to an on-call medical advice service for airlines in emergencies, and the doctor on the other end agrees with my assessment. So the plane turns back, heading to the airport where we just came from. I have a conversation with the on-call service, and boring doctor conversation happens. I then get given a plan for the patient on the plane, which is awesome. The aircraft had a surprisingly well-stocked first aid kit on board, so I begin administering fluids to my new patient while all of this is happening. As I'm doing so, a woman, the Karen of the story, comes up, and she introduces herself as a nurse, showing me her work badge. And don't ask me why she had one on the plane, I have no idea. I just thought to myself, great, the extra set of experienced hands will be useful. I then ask her to start the fluids once I get a line inserted into the patient, and tell her to recheck his vitals in a few minutes to see how he's responding. The flight attendant who initially took me to the patient then tells me the nurse will handle it from here, and that she would like me to return to my seat. I just thought to myself, okay, that's weird. Her demeanor's a bit off, but I never noticed it at the time. But there's nothing else I can do for the guy with the onboard resources. We don't have the drugs he needs, and the nurse was perfectly happy to stay with him and alert me if anything goes downhill. So I head back to my seat, thinking I've done a good job. Not too bad for a shiny new doctor. Fast forward 20 minutes and the plane's landed again, and we appear to have gone to an empty gate somewhere away from the main terminals. This is when the same flight attendant comes up, and she asked if I could please go and speak to the paramedics at the front of the plane as they board. I tell her, sure thing. So I head up to the front of the plane, where I'm met by two very serious-looking police officers. One officer says, "Sir, would you mind stepping off the plane for a moment? We would like to have a chat with you." I think to myself, uh-oh, what did I do? I of course comply and step off the plane, after which I'm taken a 2-minute walk away from the plane and put into an office. One officer then says to me, "Are you aware that impersonating a doctor is a serious offense?" I of course ask what this was all about, and I'm told that the cabin crew called ahead to say that a medical student was impersonating a doctor on the plane, and he was treating a patient on board the aircraft. They then ask for my ID and any documentation I can provide to prove I'm a doctor, and there's a slight problem. While I can provide my registration number, my passport, my wallet, my ID, everything is in my carry-on bag under my fiance's seat. One officer steps out to talk to someone, I assume to get my carry-on off the plane, while another officer continues talking to me. I later found out that the nurse who helped me vaguely recognized me from somewhere. I had been on placement at her hospital as a medical student the year before, and she told the flight attendant that I'm not even a doctor like I said, that I was nothing but a medical student. Rather than talk to me about it, they just assumed the nurse was right, and they took steps to separate me from the patient. I was so focused on the patient that I never noticed the change in body language from the cabin crew, or really took notice of the oddity of asking me back to my seat. Then again later, when they lied to me to get me to exit the plane quietly. The officer who stepped out came back after what felt like half an hour, and through some police magic was able to somehow verify who I was and that I was actually a doctor, but they hadn't thought to speak to the airline at all about my belongings. They then let me go and take me back to where the plane was. The only problem was the plane wasn't there. They refueled and they had taken off again. So now I'm stuck in an airport on the wrong side of passport control, without any form of identification, no home key, no money, no phone, nothing. I hadn't been able to speak to my fiance or any of my friends, so they had no idea what was going on. From their perspective, I just vanished, and no one would answer their questions throughout the entire flight or after they landed. The airline I was flying with also had the gall to try and deny any wrongdoing. They refused to transfer me to a different flight as I was asked to leave the plane, so I must have been in the wrong. As far as they were concerned, I should just go away and leave them alone. They even tried to prevent me from using their phone to call someone for help. I end up having to call my father-in-law to come pick me up. I had to stay with them for a week without any clothes or toiletries until my now wife got back with all of my stuff because I don't have a key to get into my apartment. Thankfully, I managed to contact her after she landed, so at least she knew I was safe, but she stayed with our friends and she enjoyed her holiday. In the end, I managed to win a claim through small claims court, but it took an awfully long time to process. I also got my money back with a small amount for damages. Throughout the entire process, despite witness statements from other passengers, the airline still adamantly refused to admit they had done anything wrong. There's still ongoing litigation, which I'm oh so looking forward to, so I won't be naming the airline that's totally not mentioned in the comments. Also, I'll never fly that airline ever again. And the guy made a full recovery. He sent me a thank you letter with some chocolates once he got out of the hospital. I still have the card to this day, and I cherish it greatly. The chocolates were crap though. Talk about no good deed going unpunished, right? Like, I just don't get why nobody talked to OP. Sir, if you're a doctor, prove it. Like, it's as easy as that instead of taking a complete stranger's word for it. Even if OP were to say, "Are you aware I'm a real doctor?" might have saved him that day. Friggin' Karen nurses ruining people's vacation. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/petty revenge episode, where scummy landlords are getting exactly what they deserve. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.